Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much. And I just want to say how much I appreciate every one of you, and those of you who leave such encouraging comments. It means the world to me. It really does, because I love to know that you're enjoying the stories, because that's what this is all about. I'm so passionate about what I do, and it really makes me feel fabulous when I know that you're enjoying the stories that you're listening to. I don't believe that there's anything better in this life than stories. They're my absolute favourite thing in the entire world. I would so much rather listen to a story than watch a television programme, because you can just close your eyes, relax, and just imagine you're there, imagining you're the characters in the story and so forth. So it just is so riveting when you're taken on a journey all on your own, and it's better than any roller coaster in the entire world. That's what I think anyway. And so you mean the world to me. Now we're on part 2 of our story tonight, and so if you haven't heard part 1, I really strongly recommend you go back to it, because you don't want to miss out on the entire story. Because every story should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not just the bit that is very, very exciting, because it's never as exciting without the build-up. The build-up is equally as important. And let's continue with part 2 of our story. 25 years later. It all happened on one cold, inauspicious winter night, when Jackie was about 50 years old. It had been about 25 long years since her best friend Debbie Greentree had passed away. And in that long period of time, so much had happened, so much had changed. Despite everything, she had forgiven Nick for his brief moment of passion all those years ago, with the seductress Letitia, against her own better judgment. Looking back, it would seem that Letitia's promiscuous advances towards her husband, and his inability to refuse them, despite being in a committed relationship with her, had exposed a weakness in his veneer, like a surreptitious leak in the scaffolding of a roof. This contentious issue had persistently plagued Jackie through the course of her marriage, exposing Nick's wandering eye. She had turned a blind eye to it, believing her husband would ultimately grow out of his loutish behaviour. But she'd been wrong about that, as she'd been wrong about so many other things in her life, where she'd made bundles of mistakes, hundreds of poor choices, and a multitude of bad decisions that had cost her dearly. But she had ridden the storms, surfed the waves, and steered her way through the undulating adventures of life. She was still flying high, regardless of some of the fortuitous, turbulent jolts and bumps along the way. But then again, whose life is ever plain sailing? We are all going to hit tumultuous weather from time to time. It's part of the rich tapestry of life. It was a year after Debbie Greentree's funeral that she'd married Nick, and the couple had twins, a girl and a boy, that were non-identical. But almost immediately after her grown-up children had finally left home, her marriage to Nick had folded like an old camping chair that was now surplus to requirements, redundant and irrelevant to her current life. Jackie had wanted to end things with Nick 10 years earlier, but raising her kids in a secure, safe environment had been significantly more important to her than anything else. By all accounts, she had sacrificed much on her children's behalf, but to Jackie, sacrificing for her children was no sacrifice at all, as any mother can appreciate the bond between a mother and her children. Let's just say capsizing the apple cart of their marriage at this crucial, momentous time in the children's development would have upset the twins immeasurably, and she couldn't have done that to them. She had learnt how a broken home would be damaging and soul-destroying to impressionable, ingenuous and suggestible young children, who would often inadvertently blame themselves for the breakup of their parents' relationship, when nothing could have been further from the truth. So her divorce with Nick had gone seamlessly, and she and Nick had remained the very best of friends. Jackie had purchased a remote farmhouse, only an hour and a half's drive away from Portland. She was very pleased to embrace this new exciting chapter in her life that was filled with promise and the sweet fresh fragrance of brand new beginnings, where she could enjoy the rich bouquets that life had to offer, without the challenges of a relationship that constantly beseeched her attention, like the roses in the yard that demanded pruning once a year. Well, that was how Jackie saw it anyway. Relationships necessitated work as far as she was concerned, which meant watering, pruning, feeding, nurturing and loving. Her relationship with Nick had been hard work. For the first time in her life she felt free like a baby eaglet, escaping the confines of its nest, and suddenly realizing that it could fly. It was a liberating feeling that was not for everyone. She had decided she never wanted to marry again. She enjoyed the serene solitude of the countryside. The warm-hearted farmhouse was well off the beaten track, which suited Jackie fine. She often felt she was in the middle of nowhere. She welcomed this new contented lifestyle very happily. When Jackie had first seen the small red-bricked unassuming farmhouse, it had been love at first sight. It had large sash windows that had twinkled in the morning with a reflectant light. She could have sworn the place had actually smiled at her, while the windows had winked. She loved the age of her house, as like her it had actually lived, and over the passing of time had absorbed the energy of all the previous residents. It gave the house a cosy, deferential, appeasing, warm glow. She believed houses were like trees. The older they became, the more mellow, improving with time like a maturing wine. She wished she could say the same for herself, but when she looked at her own appearance in the mirror, she didn't always like what she saw staring back at her. She could see that middle-age had announced its presence rather prominently on her face, like the autumn leaves on an old oak tree. It was like middle age was now saying to her unabashedly, "Here I am," and greeting her with a friendly warmth that she certainly did not want to reciprocate. Let's just say getting older was not something she wanted to welcome with open arms. Indeed, it was something you would chase away, like a pest you wanted to exterminate, for daring to cross the threshold of your body. She knew she'd never been more wise or more comfortable in her own skin. She even liked who she'd become over the last few years. But the outside certainly did not reflect the self-possessed qualities of the inside. She had noticed the efficient arrival of grey hair that was as tenacious as a weed, and no sooner did you cover it up with some brown hair dye, the roots would come bounding back again, begging to be coloured. The constant repetitive dyeing had dried up her hair so much, it had become awfully brittle, rather like straw. It was probably good enough to be used on a thatched roof, she thought. Then there was the notorious sprouting of facial hairs on the chin that constantly needed to be plucked. Then, of course, there was her skin that, like an old leather boot, had been worn far too many times and was beginning to look weathered, tired, fatigued, while the wrinkles were creeping around her eyes like the creepers on an old building and could be seen spreading across her forehead and around her mouth. Her once perfectly peachy, flawless skin was beginning to look loose over the jowls. It didn't spring back like it used to when she was younger, and her skin was so much more resilient back then. One of her friends had suggested that to keep the ravages of time at bay, a nip here, a tuck there, might be the answer to all Jackie's problems. But Jackie firmly believed in growing old gracefully. She knew she'd stay the hell away from the surgeon's office. Growing older wasn't that bad, surely. Wrinkles meant you had weathered many storms, overcome hurdles, fallen through crevices, almost jumped off cliff faces, hypothetically speaking. In other words, you had lived, and what was wrong with that? Wrinkles were like proud scars or achievements that you wore on your body, the indelible hallmarks of the victories you had masterfully overcome. It was a dreadful pity that in American culture, the ageing process was almost shunned, rather than appreciated or valued, like in other cultures, where the young hung on to the wise, judicious words of older generations, knowing that they would do well to harness the sagacious advice from those that had lived far longer than them and weathered the intrepid storms in life that they might soon one day have to encounter, and seeking their advice would make their own journeys far less taxing. If Jackie could not halt the ageing process in her own body, she could certainly improve the ageing process in her farmhouse and restore the things that needed a facelift, and she had certainly succeeded in doing just that. She was the surgeon of her own home. She had lifted up old floorboards that needed replacing and retiled some of the old fireplaces, painted walls, polished floors, re-enamelled windows, replaced broken hinges, cleaned chimneys, and replaced ceilings. It had that cosy, lived-in feeling about it. And all the unpretentious furnishings in her house were elegant but comfortable at the same time, inviting you to collapse on their soft-cushioned seats and to toast your chilled feet by a sumptuous marble fireplace. It was certainly a pleasant evening that night. Jackie sat there reading a book, her cat Mr. Solitaire lying across her lap, while she was caught up in an exciting chapter where the evil man in the story was being murdered by a vigilante. She didn't care about that. She felt reasonably satisfied that the man was getting his just deserts. Jackie had very strong opinions about what was right and what was wrong, although she didn't like killing of any kind. When someone was insanely evil, she could see that their death was justified. It was much better to live in a world where the darkness was eliminated and eradicated, and all that was duplicitously evil gone. It made the world a much safer place, she thought, where your kids could contentedly play down the streets, without your having to worry that someone with the moral perversity of an alley cat would prey upon them. It was no more than exterminating roaches, or eliminating black mould, or an infestation of lice, in her humble opinion. The fire she had made earlier on in the evening was exceedingly pleasant. It was crackling, spitting, folding and curling in the grate. She found it very pleasing to watch, with the bright orange flames dancing around the firewood. She knew the weather was freezing out there. It was winter, and the maple and oak trees in the woodgrove had been stripped of all their leaves. Their naked boughs jutted up in the greyish-blue sky, with a regal impertinence, as if to say, "I still look magnificent without my finery." And they certainly did. They made no apologies for their stark, barren nudity, but were always remarkably comfortable with their seasonal changes. Even in winter, when things became browner, the stone-washed grass lost some of its verdant splendour. There was a rugged beauty of the browner landscape. Some might not agree with her, but Jackie could see it. She could see beauty in everything, and was hoping to eventually see it in her ageing face. But she thought such appreciation would be a long time in coming. Even though it was the beginning of December, when the earth was expecting to be anointed with snow, it had not fallen yet. But she knew when it did, she would be greeted to a white winter wonderland. And out here in her remote farmhouse, the winters were magnificent, provided you kept yourself nice and warm, of course. She was lucky, as her farmhouse was small. A simple fireplace in the living room and the wood-burning stove in the kitchen kept her house deliciously warm throughout the entire winter. There was nothing better than sitting by a fire, staring out at a crisp white world, uncontaminated by human footprints. This evening the farmhouse was peacefully cloaked in a pleasingly tranquil silence that Jackie had grown used to and rather enjoyed. It drowned out the protuberant noises of the world. She liked that very much. It was then that she heard the interfering, obtrusive, unwelcome sound of purring wheels rolling down her driveway. She could hear a truck juddering slightly, until it ground to a halt. The engine was suddenly killed, the headlights punched out, and the truck door opened and closed as someone ambiguous climbed out of the driver's side door, slamming it rather loudly behind them. Jackie knew she never got visitors, not out here in the middle of the night like this. Let's just say her farmhouse was on the edge of a sequestered, inconspicuous dirt road, not well travelled, lonesome, barely ever used. But someone was presumptuously trespassing on her territory now. She was more than a little flustered about this unpalatable revelation. Who could her mystery visitor be? Jackie never liked spontaneous, unexpected visitors, because what was not expected wasn't always good news. Jackie liked predictability, fixed rendezvous, pre-arranged get-togethers, but not spontaneous surprises. Jackie scrutinised the view outside her kitchen window that overlooked the front yard to see who this fortuitous visitor was, but all she perceived was the dense, tenebrific silhouette of a truck and a faint, obscure figure moving hurriedly towards her door. She could hear feet crunching gravel as they neared their approach. It was so dark and dusky out there. The resistant moonlight seemed shrouded behind some cloud cover, which always seemed to annoyingly happen when you wanted to see something more clearly. Jackie waited attentively and listened. Sure enough, she heard the loud rapping at her front door. Jackie was still wearing her jeans and a warm sweatshirt. She glanced at the time on the mantel above the fireplace. It was 10 o'clock at night. This was a late visitor. Who could it be disturbing her so rudely at this time? 2 hours away from the witching hour. It was ridiculous. Jackie grudgingly moved over to the front door. With a circumspect diffidence, she lifted up a fire poker in one hand and called out, "Who's there?" "It's me," came a demure voice. It was the voice of a woman, and although Jackie did not recognise the voice, she didn't feel threatened, so she opened the door. A young woman was standing in the doorway, wearing a velvety blue coat that clung tightly to her narrow waist. She looked to be about 35 years old, but there was something about her face that looked strikingly familiar. But Jackie couldn't decide what it was. "Hello, Jackie. It's me. Remember you said that if I needed your help, I could come to you?" "Sorry," says Jackie, looking at the young woman with a perplexed expression on her face. "Do I know you? You do look awfully familiar, I will admit that. But I'm sorry I can't place you. Have we met before?" "I'm Daisy Greentree, Debbie Greentree's daughter. You were best friends with my mother 25 years ago. I was 10 years old at the time, but I remember you very well. If you recall, they found my mother had drowned in a lake when my grandfather's truck veered off the road. Remember that rickety bridge over the lake that everybody said was a liability? I believe they found another woman's body there as well. She'd been missing for an awful long time. You were at the funeral. It was pouring with rain. The storm was terrible. I remember you made a promise to me that if I ever needed your help, I was to call on you. That day has arrived. I need you to help me now." "You're Daisy Greentree," says Jackie, looking nonplussed. "My, you've grown into quite a lovely-looking young lady. The last time I saw you, you were very young. You look strikingly like your mother," she says, her eyes now filling with tears of nostalgia as she thinks of her beloved old friend that she had sadly lost so tragically all those years ago. "How have you been, Daisy?" "Well, my grandfather died when I was 15, so I was taken to live in a foster home. It was tough, you know. I never did manage to locate my birth father, which was a real bummer. Life hasn't been easy for me. That's why I've turned to you. You're the only person I know that will actually help me." Jackie is filled with guilt when she hears this startling revelation. She feels dreadful that she had not remained in touch with Debbie Greentree's daughter all these years. Why had she been so caught up in herself and her family that she'd not thought to contact the young girl, who had now ended up at the mercy of social services? She recalls how Debbie had appeared to her in a dream, begging her to take care of little Daisy. She finds herself flushing with the shame of her apathy. "Please come in, Daisy," she says. "Thank you," says the young woman, removing her coat and hanging it on the hook in the hall. Jackie leads Daisy into the living room and gestures for her to sit by the fire. But Daisy, hungry for warmth, stands by the fire, stretching her fingers towards the flames. "Oh, this fire of yours is so blissful. I felt as if my fingers were about to drop off, they were so numb. But now I'm much warmer, thanks to your amazing fire." She glances around at the living room with an approving appreciation. "You've got taste, Jackie. Why am I not surprised? Your farmhouse has that lived-in feeling about it. It's not like some of these places where you daren't sit on the couch because it's so pretentious, and the place is so perfect you're scared that by merely sitting on something you're going to put a mark on it. One of the foster homes I lived in was exactly like that. The family kept all their furniture wrapped in cellophane in order to preserve it, so we had to sit on plastic couches all the time. It was terribly unpleasant. The plastic would stick to the back of my legs. It would be so sweaty. That was the worst foster home I ever lived in. The mother was obsessed with cleanliness. We weren't allowed to wear shoes in the house. You'd wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning to the wife hoovering the furniture. It would be so disturbing. The noise would drive me bonkers. In the end, her husband could not take her incessant cleaning any more, so they split up. He told his solicitor he was filing for divorce as his wife was addicted to bleach. I think he took it quite literally." She laughs, a pretty musical laugh. "I think he thought she was glugging the stuff back like Kool-Aid." Oh dear, Daisy. That was no way to live. I just wish you'd contacted me sooner, I really do. I would have been more than happy for you to move in with us, become part of our family. I know the twins would have loved an older sister to look up to like you. So how can I help you, Daisy? If you're looking for somewhere to stay, you're more than welcome to stay here with me. How did you find me?" "Oh, that was easy enough. I asked Pastor Bob if he knew where you lived. He gave me your daughter's telephone number. She gave me your new address. When I told your daughter I was Debbie Greentree's daughter, they knew who I was at once, so they didn't hesitate to give me all your details. That's right, my daughter and son. They're non-identical twins, you know. They knew all about Debbie growing up. I talked about her an awful lot, even though she died a long time ago now. It feels almost as if it happened yesterday. The emotions are still raw. You never get over something like that. Do you remember your promise to me that day, when it was pouring with rain at the funeral?" "Of course I do, Daisy." "Well, I need your help now. I've no one else to turn to, and I'm going to hold you to that promise. Can you guarantee me your discretion? It's incredibly important." "Of course I'll help. What is it, Daisy?" "I've killed my boyfriend. He's lying dead in the back of my truck. I need you to help me hide the evidence. I thought we could bury him on your farm somewhere, burn up my car, so there's no link between me and his disappearance. He's from Poland, so no one knows about him. He's been working as an assistant chef at a local hotel. If he goes missing, people will think he returned to Poland. He's also estranged from his parents. He had a massive fallout with them, so they won't be worried about him either. I wouldn't embroil you in all this, but I can't go to prison. I just can't. I wouldn't survive in a place like that." For a moment, Jackie thinks she's caught up in the most horrifying, surreal nightmare. "You killed your boyfriend," she says, looking at Daisy in horror, as if her friend's daughter has suddenly become a callous monster. Had she heard right? Is this young girl, Daisy, expecting her to duplicitously cover up a murder? She can't be expected to help her late friend's daughter like this. She could be accused of assisting in covering up a crime. And Jackie does not want to end up locked up in a prison cell for something she did not do. But then again, she does not want to turn her back on her best friend's daughter either. What the hell is she supposed to do about this? Daisy nods. Tears stream down her face. "Don't look at me like that, Jackie. I'm not a monster. I'm not. Believe me, Marson is the monster. He was the monster in our relationship." She pulls up her sleeves and shows me some black bruises on her arms. Jackie gets up to examine the bruises. "He did this to you? Why on earth did you not tell the police about this? Why would you stay with a man like this? You're asking for trouble." "Because I loved him, that's why. I thought he would change. You see, he isn't always a monster. People like that aren't always monsters. Most of the time he was sweet. He was good to me. He made me feel so happy. But then there were other times he would lose it, get so violently angry. That's when he'd hurt me. The next day he was so apologetic. He'd say he was so sorry about what happened, that he didn't mean it, and I was his entire world. And he didn't know what had possessed him to hurt me like that, and that he'd never ever do it again. But you know what, Jackie? The tragedy is he always did. It was like I was in a relationship with a Jekyll and Hyde type personality. Most of the time, Marson was like a clear sunny day. But when the thunderclouds came out, you had to be so careful, because you knew he might strike you down with his lightning temper. And when he was like that, Jackie, I was so terrified of him, so terrified." Oh dear, says Jackie, looking at Daisy with empathy. "You were in love with one part of him, but the other part of him you tried to bury away, pretend it wasn't there. If he was so loving most of the time, it was easy to overlook the times he was violent. It's got to be like walking on eggshells all the time, not knowing when he's going to throw a hissy fit. Something like that. Tell me what happened from the very beginning." "Well, we were in the supermarket together one day. You see, I work as a waitress at the local hotel. You see, that's how we actually met. Marson assists the head chef there. He's an excellent cook. For a long time he thought I had a thing for one of the managers at the hotel, a man called Brian Roper. There'd been nothing going on between the two of us. Brian and I were just good friends that had a similar sense of humour. But try telling that to Marson. He was so jealous. Anyway, I serendipitously bump into Brian when putting some chips into the trolley at the supermarket. Marson had gone off to pick up some cheeses at the counter. Brian and I were talking together. He told me some funny jokes. What was it he said? Oh, yes, cosmetic surgery used to be a taboo subject. Now you can talk about Botox and no one raises an eyebrow. And what was the other one he said? What does a painter do when he's cold? He puts on another coat. Stuff like that. Brian's always got a fabulous joke up his sleeve. So I was naturally laughing. Let's just say I think he can pick up Marson's jealousy, because Marson is so possessive of me. Anyway, Marson reappears from the cheese counter. He physically scowls when he sees us laughing together. He has the cheeses in his hands, which he lowers into our trolley, and he gives Brian a scathing look. Brian, sensing the hostility from Marson, says, "How you doing, Marson? Very good to see you, bro." And he quickly makes an excuse, glances at his cell phone and says, "Golly, is that the time? I must go. I'm in a dreadful hurry." He bids me goodbye, nods politely, and scuttles away guiltily. Even though he had nothing to feel guilty about whatsoever, but Marson can make you feel like that. He certainly gave Brian a killer look. And when I looked at his face at the supermarket, it had grown as black as thunder. I was scared even before we returned home that day. I didn't even want to get out of the truck. I knew what awaited me when we got into the apartment. Just like overcast weather, his face gave me that forewarning. The bad weather was coming my way, storm clouds, lightning, the works. You know the score. Marson was furiously jealous. He beat me up, accusing me of all sorts, and of clandestinely having an affair with Brian behind his back. I told him it was nonsense, but he absolutely refused to listen. I thought he was going to kill me when he had his hands clasped around my neck, and he began to squeeze. His eyes just suddenly became as black as coal. I was gasping for breath, telling him to stop, and he had me pinned against the wall, right next to the telephone table. So I reached out to grab the heavy statue of the Buddha, and I thrashed it across his head as hard as I could. He fell back onto the ground and stopped moving. I ran over to him. I tried to wake him up. I tried to find a pulse, but I knew he was dead. So I managed to drag him to my truck, hauling him into the back. I nearly died in the process of physical exhaustion. I don't even know how I managed to lift him up, because he's quite heavy. But that's exactly what happened. I don't want to go down for this. Marson was the antagonizer, not me. I was fighting back, but things went so horribly wrong. And now I'm in such a dreadful mess, such a screw-up. This is the sort of thing that happens in movies, but not in real life, and not to people like me. Well, sweetheart, it was self-defense. You were defending yourself. You tell the police what you told me, and all will be well. Are you kidding me, Jackie? You do know what will happen. I'll be taken to prison for a couple of years, before there's even a court case. And even then, there are no guarantees that I'll even get off. I can't afford to take that risk. I don't want to spend a single day in a prison. You hear of cases of people who aren't guilty, going down for years and years. Do you know, Jackie, if you accidentally hit someone who runs out into the road, and you got a whisper of alcohol on your breath, you can go down for 20 years. It happened to one of the waitresses I work with. Her sister. She tried to take her life in prison. She can't hack it there. You have to help me, Jackie. I can't spend a single day in a prison cell. I just can't, and I won't survive. I promise you, Jackie, I couldn't cope. Not in that kind of environment. I would lose it. I wish you wouldn't get so upset, Daisy. I want to help you, and I believe every word you've told me. I'm sure you won't go to prison. It definitely is self-defense, and we can get you the very best lawyer, and I'm happy to do that for you. And even if there is a court case, it'll definitely go your way. There isn't a juror in the land that wouldn't believe your account. Really? Are you kidding, Jackie? For one so mature, you're terribly naive. Sometimes those lawyers are so convincing. They can artfully persuade a jury to free a guilty man, and an innocent person to go to jail. If they can proficiently persuade the jury with their adroit silver tongue, then you're in trouble. Especially if they're against you. Your fate is doomed. Everyone knows the judicial system is corrupt. Most people don't know the side of Marson I did. I'm sure they'd find people to testify against me, say that Marson couldn't hurt a fly, and that he was such a nice person. They'd possibly paint me in an unfavourable light. I can't take that risk, Jackie. I could be sent down for a very long time. No one knew the dark side of Marson like I did. But you've got bruises to prove what he did to you. That's hearsay, Jackie. I could have bruised myself. You've only got my word for it. They could say I made it all up. You never know. You would have done anything for my mother, would you not, Jackie? Jackie nods. Of course I would have done anything for your mother. If it was her begging you to help me cover this up, would you have helped her do it? Jackie thinks about this for a moment. Well, if there was a hint of her going to jail for something like this, I would definitely help her cover it up. Don't you see? You're helping my mother when you help me. I'm her daughter, and you did tell me that if there was anything I need, you would help me. And I'm here. You made a promise to me, Jackie. Now you need to fulfill that promise. Very well, I'll help you. I hope the hell I know what I'm doing. What are you going to say at work about Marson? I'll say he returned home to Poland because he got very homesick. Don't you see, no one will suspect a single thing. But what about this Brian character? Won't he think it strange that you and Marson are no longer together? I doubt it. I'll say we split up. So he went back to Poland. There was nothing left for him in America anymore. I know Brian would believe that. I think we should do this now, says Jackie, before I change my mind. Are you up to it? It's cold and dark outside, but I'll get some shovels and some lemonade. Digging is thirsty work. I just want to examine the body. Just make sure he's really dead. He's dead, said Daisy. I checked. When Jackie opened the trunk of Daisy's car, she wasn't prepared for what she would see. She observed the crumpled remains of a deceased corpse of a young man who was still warm. She was mortified. It was like she was being flung in the middle of a surreal nightmare. Was this really happening? Was she going to help cover up a death? Get a grip, she told herself. You're doing this for Daisy and for her mother, Debbie Greentree. I failed to help Daisy earlier on in her life, and I'll be damned if I don't help her now. Debbie would be devastated if Daisy had to spend a single night in jail, let alone years. And Daisy was right. How could you be sure things would go in her way in a court of law? Things could become twisted and manipulated by a skillful lawyer who could artfully persuade a jury that Daisy was a vindictive, vile person that deserved to rot away in a prison cell. No, she couldn't let this happen to her best friend's daughter. Not on your Nellie. The weather was freezing. It was furiously biting down to bone and sinew. The two women wrap up warmly with gloves and headscarves, and Daisy drives her Land Cruiser across the grassy terrain to the edge of a sprawling woodgrove that fringes an alpine meadow. Are you ready? Says Jackie. If we're going to do this, it's not too late to change your mind, Daisy. But once we've buried the body in the ground, it's too late then. Do you understand what I'm saying? No, we're going to do this, says Daisy. There is no other way. The two women stealthily climb out of the Land Cruiser, closing their doors quietly behind them. There is an icy cold breeze whistling through the trees, nudging their cheeks. Everything is tenebrously dark. The moonlight has slipped behind the shadows, as if turning a blind eye to what the women are doing tonight. The stars have lost their sparkle. They seem dusted by a veil of cloud cover. Jackie's hands, even though they're covered by fleece-lined gloves, feel like ice-cold sticks, and when she breathes out, her breath looks like a vapour from the steam of a kettle. The two women open up the back of the trunk and manage to drop the crumpled body from the trunk to the canvas torpine below. Then they both drag it across the ground so that it slides over the earthen floor very easily. Where are we going to bury him? Asked Daisy. I think under that oak tree over there, says Jackie. It's still young. It's got lots of growing to do. When its roots get more mature, they'll eat up the corpse like bone meal. You think so? Asked Daisy. I do, says Jackie. The frozen women begin to dig up the ground. It's exhausting, laborious work. The ground is unyielding and not exactly soft, but there is a saving grace. The physical exertion is making them both warm. The forest is very quiet and subdued. Even the trees appear muted in their graceful repose, as if they are soundlessly watching the two women's every move. The unassuming witnesses of a secret that the two women hope will be clandestinely hidden for many centuries, and better still, never found out. All you can hear are the airy, ghostly sounds of a wind whistling through the trees. Jackie cannot shake the ominous, unsettling feeling that they're being watched by curiously inquisitive, predatory eyes. She reminds herself that they're wild animals in the forest, and anything could have observed them. A lone fox, perhaps. A couple of raccoons. She tells herself she feels very conspicuous and self-conscious because a big part of her knows that what she's doing is covering up a death to protect her best friend's daughter. That's why she's feeling like this. If you had asked her even a week ago if she was capable of covering up somebody else's deadly mistake, would she have been capable of doing this? She would have unequivocally said no. But this is different, very different. This is personal. And Jackie will do anything for her old friend Debbie Greentree. Anything. I'm exhausted, says Daisy. Let's take a break. The women walk over the earthen floor back to the truck, and they comfortably sit in the front seats, drinking back bottles of icy-cold lemonade. Their breathing is laboured, their faces flushed, their hands still icy and numb. Phew, that's exhausting work, says Jackie. I'm so fatigued. But we can't stop now. We have to keep pushing on. We've got to finish what we started. I think the sooner we've done what we've set out to do, the sooner we can relax. Thanks, Jackie, says Daisy, reaching out to give the woman a squeeze. I so appreciate your help. Remind me not to go promising people stuff, says Jackie, joking. You might be asked to do something that crosses the boundaries of what you deem as comfortable. Come on, let's get back to work, shall we? The two women climb out of their truck rather reluctantly, walking through the trees, stopping dead in their tracks. They see someone leaning over the deceased corpse. The first thought that comes bounding into Jackie's head is, "Oh my God, we've been caught red-handed. Someone has found out what we've done. Me and Daisy were going to go down for this." The man who is examining the corpse is wearing the thickest winter coat. What the hell is he doing in her woodgrove anyway? Where did he come from? She lives in a remote area. Where did this random stranger just suddenly appear from? She can see the man's hand slapping the cheeks of the dead corpse, and then he stands up to face the both of them, and to their absolute horror, they realise that this is not a man, but a Bigfoot. Jackie had heard stories of the cryptid creatures before, but had never given the stories much credibility. She believed that they were the fabrications of an overactive imagination that turns a bear encounter into a Bigfoot, but she is in no doubt what she's seeing now. She can hear Daisy is audibly gasping, and even though she's not looking at Daisy's expression, she is profoundly aware that the woman is astonished by what she's seeing. The Bigfoot is over 8 foot tall, female with floppy breasts and a muscular body, devoid of even an inch of fat. She is robust and powerful looking, and Jackie thinks she could easily weigh 700 pounds, despite her leanness, as her body is remarkably well built, and her shoulders are absolutely enormous. The creature is covered in long flowing hair, that Jackie thinks is an inky black colour, but you can't be sure in the dark. She possesses an arch-shaped head that is low slung on her shoulders, to such an extent it would be easy to assume that she hadn't got a neck, but that would be wrong. The creature has a very short, stout, but stocky neck, and a face so remarkably human, it had taken Jackie completely off guard. Are not Bigfoot supposed to have primate characteristics, she thinks? This creature certainly doesn't, unless of course you count the overlong arms and the hair. Jackie tries to think what the face reminds her of, and then she remembers she has a picture of an Indian warrior in a headdress on her coffee table in the living room. Oh my God, her face looks exactly like that. It has such a noble, regal quality about it, a wizened look on her face that makes you think she's very intelligent. The creature is beckoning to the two women, pointing to the body. She's chattering excitedly, backwards and forwards to them. There is nothing aggressive or threatening about her, so the two women follow the creature. The Bigfoot bends down and slaps the face of the corpse. Marson responds by grumbling and groaning. Oh my word, he's alive! He's alive! Jackie and Daisy look at each other in bewilderment. They realise they came this close to burying Marson alive. The Bigfoot is chattering excitedly to them. Jackie gets the profound sense that the creature is as thrilled as they are, that the dead body that they were about to bury has miraculously returned to life. The Bigfoot lifts up the body without even being asked and follows the woman back to the car, popping Marson's body on the back seat. The creature seems hell-bent on helping the two women, whom she realizes are puny and weak, so she follows them as they drive back to the farmhouse. When Jackie opens the trunk of the car, the Bigfoot is standing there, almost offering her services, and Jackie indicates for the creature to take the body of Marson up the stairs to the spare bedroom. The Bigfoot seems to understand everything she's saying, and dutifully pops Marson on the bed. "Thank you," says Jackie. "Thank you." The benevolent, kind-hearted Bigfoot nods at Jackie, almost as if she's smiling at her, and then she bounds down the steps, glides out of the house, almost floating back into the forest, with a grace that leaves the two confounded women completely speechless. Bloody hell! Did that actually just happen? Did we just meet a Bigfoot who helped us? And is Marson really alive? Did that happen? I feel as if I'm in some kind of parallel universe. To cut a long story short, Jackie told me and my twin sister this incredulous story, in the strictest of confidence. It would seem that she and Daisy took care of Marson until he fully recovered. It was fortunate he seemed to have no memory of being whacked over the head by a statue, although he did confess he had a dream that a Bigfoot had been slapping him on the face, telling him to wake up. It was my mother, Jackie, who informed Marson that he had taken a tumble and fallen over some steps, hitting his head, which was why he was badly concussed. Needless to say, Daisy and Marson never rekindled their relationship, and in the end he did return to Poland, and I gather he's married with children of his own. My mother now lives with Daisy in the red-bricked farmhouse, and they've started growing crops on their land, which they sell at the farmer's market. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.